Are they going to be here or they're?
They're all going to be virtual. Yeah, they're all virtual tonight. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good evening.
All right. I'm going to start with our staff opening remarks, and then I'll turn it over to you. Okay, Lauren?
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. So welcome to the February 2025 Design Review Committee meeting. I'm going to call the roll to confirm that our DRC members are present. Omari Davis.
Here.
Robert Dudka.
Here.
Alex Foster is excused. Andy Wenchel.
Here.
Right. DRC meetings are held in person and streamed simultaneously to allow commissioners, applicants, and the public to attend online. For members of the board joining us virtually this evening, please ensure that your video is turned on and you are visible during the entire meeting. I'm going to skip the next sentence because we don't have anybody attending virtually this evening. For applicants and others joining us this evening virtually, if you lose internet connectivity during the meeting, please reconnect with us via the dial-in phone option. Please keep your devices muted and your video turned off until your item is under review. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on the meeting command bar at the top of the window. We do not have the ability to unmute you. If you are dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. The meeting chat is active for participants who need technical assistance and should not be used for questions. The public may observe the meetings, but participation in the discussion is limited to applicants and members of the HALRB during this meeting. Public comment is welcome at the HALRB meeting. Information about signing up as a speaker or submitting public comment for that meeting is available on the HALRB website. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. So with that, Lauren, you should have presenter status, so please feel free to share your presentation.
Okay, great. Does Alice also have it? I think she's going to share the slides for us tonight.
She does. I thought that it might be Alice.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, thanks, Michael. Good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is Lauren Riley. I'm with Walsh Colucci. We represent Gyre Lynch Real Estate Partners with regard to the Barcroft land use entitlements. And just to introduce everyone here tonight, we've got Alice Hageman with Gyre Lynch. I see Jeff Krebs here with VICA, our civil engineer for the project. From Traceries, we have Sarah Bonish. And then from the architect team, which is mostly architects, we have Tom Liebel, Martin Olivier, and I think Danny Mickelson is here as well. So our whole team will be available for questions as we go throughout the presentation tonight. And just to give a little bit of background on kind of where we've been and where we've headed, we started this process almost 2 years ago with the first renovation project in Barcroft. We've had 4 renovation projects approved. The most recent one was last June. For the phase 4 and for the phase 4 project. And since then, Gyre Lynch and the county have been working to update the form-based code amendments to reflect the vision of the master finance and development plan that was also approved last summer. And some of y'all may be aware of that as we went to the expanded Columbia Pike Advisory Working Group a few months ago to discuss those revisions to the form-based code and solidify those changes. Those will be going to the board next month in February. And then in terms of the renovations, as we look ahead, we've decided to divvy up all of the remaining buildings to be preserved and renovated in Barcroft into 3 use permits. So tonight we'll go over 2 of them, what we're calling the RBU2 and the RCU2 use permits. Next month, you'll hear we'll bring the 3rd and final one before you, which is going to be called RA2, and it'll deal with the remaining units down there in the tail of Barcroft. And so tonight, just to move through these presentations in a quick manner, because the scale of these is a little bit larger than what you've seen before. So as you can see here, this first renovation phase, RBU2, it encompasses 11 buildings and a little over 300 units. So We'll be giving you some highlights tonight over where these are located, the scope of work. Vika will go over some landscape updates, and then Tom and his team at Mosley will hit on the main architectural changes. Once our presentation's over, we're happy to come back to any of these slides for discussion, and these are generally the same ones that were submitted to you a couple weeks ago. So if we go to the next slide, Alice. So here's that very helpful image that Sarah at Traceries has developed. This shows the location, the outline of this renovation area. So it's 11 buildings, buildings 1 through 11 in section 1 of Barcroft. So these were the first buildings to be constructed in the Barcroft area. Couple things to note here. We have 2 garages that will be preserved. They're behind buildings 10 and 11. And Mosley can go over and Alice can go over some of the scope of work there, but it's mainly going to be repairing those existing garages to remain. The roofs are intact, and we'll just be doing some cleanup items on those garages. The remaining 3 garages there that are behind buildings 3, 4, and 8, those will be demolished as is anticipated by the Master Finance and Development Plan, as well as the Columbia Pike regulating plan. I will note that building 3 was in the area that could be adjacent to conservation area, could be redeveloped. Gyre Lynch has decided to keep building 3 as it's not necessary to demolish it for future development. So we'll be retaining that. And then we've also, as part of the updates to the form-based code, we're no longer removing or demolishing a portion of building 6. If you remember early on in the process, we had proposed putting a resident amenity center in that location for residents of Barcroft. Gyre Lynch has now decided that that resident amenity center will be located within one of the new construction buildings, and so we won't need to alter building 6 or demolish it to make way for that resident amenity center, though you'll see in some of the landscape updates where we're providing some more usable space there for the residents as a whole. And then we can go to, we're going to skip through some of these more technical slides and the photos. Happy to come back to these if we have any specific questions. And then in terms of the scope of work, this is going to be very similar to what you all have seen with the past 4 renovation projects. We will be cleaning up the brick, infilling openings for exhaust systems that we no longer need, and adding new openings to accommodate mechanical equipment and exhausts. Primarily, that will be on non-primary facades. And then we'll also be replacing light fixtures, shutters, railings, etc. We'll be making some improvements to the courtyard to provide and program some of that outdoor space for the residents. Here in this use permit, we'll be creating 5 type A accessible units. This will occur partially through conversion of some existing units, through 3 existing units to accessible, and we'll also be able to add 2 additional units in this section, 2 new type A accessible units here. And then along with that, as with previous renovations, we'll have to introduce some new penetrations and enlarged openings to accommodate those new accessible entrances. There'll also be some ramping in a few places as well, and I think Mosley can go over where those instances occur. And then we'll also, in terms of waivers and modifications, we don't need as many modifications now that the form-based code is amendments are being adopted. You will see in our application that we're still showing the aluminum or vinyl cladding of wood material, as well as canopies over existing entrances like we have with previous applications. We will continue to request a Virginia housing waiver for those elements. We've actually been receiving those waivers for other renovation use permits as we've gone through, so we anticipate that we will be granted those waivers. And then I'll also highlight, though, that we'll be keeping the canopies over the accessible unit entrances because those are direct entrances, and we want to provide some shelter from the elements there. We'll also just generally need a modification for the existing buildings to remain and continue to conform to zoning ordinance requirements as we have with previous projects. And then with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jeff and Vika to go through landscaping, and then I think he'll hand it off to Tom at Mosley to go through the architecture, and we'll go back to after that, we'll quickly go through the highlights of the second use permit, and then we can open it up for discussion and Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Again, as Lauren said, I'm Jeff Krebs. I'm the Director of Landscape Architecture here at VICA, and nice to be back in front of you again. I'm just going to hit the highlights because I know most of the focus, for these projects is on the buildings, the architecture, but we are making some improvements to the individual use permit areas as we go through, trying to enhance the amenities for the residents of those particular groups. And as you saw in the previous submissions, for each cluster of buildings, we're trying to address through the provision of some sort of an amenity space for each. So we have access equal, I would say local access, right, from each of those buildings through their courtyards to do that. And usually that's taking the form of a place for outdoor grilling, a few picnic tables or tables with chairs to, again, facilitate communing and just being there in a more sort of organized fashion rather than just sort of randomly throughout. So in this particular case, RB1, it's very closely related to RB2, RC2, RUC2, as you will see. And they do share a couple of common elements. But one of the things I wanted to focus on here is if you look in the sort of upper right or upper left quadrant, you'll see that we have within this complex, there is an opportunity for us to create a larger, more central, more Barcroft-wide couple of amenity spaces. So in the central courtyard there, what you see as a green rectangle is being sort of studied as a place to provide a playground of some substance, right? So that people could come from all of the buildings around Barcroft. If they live far away or if they have accessibility needs, they would be able to drive and park there and have access to some of these things. One of the things that we've discovered is that as you go through, as you know, the Barcroft site's very topographically challenged, right? So it's hard to site a lot of play furniture that are close to the individual buildings, and it began to feel a little bit scattered. So we thought sort of consolidation into a more meaningful play area on what turns out to be some of the flattest part of the site would be the way to go. So that's what's currently sort of envisioned in that courtyard space. There is an additional space off to the right in red that shows, where a place for grilling and eating outside might occur. And then just below on the other side, adjacent to Thomas Street, is another open area on Barcroft that's again one of the few areas that's not encumbered by a lot of slope. And one of the things we heard from the residents back when we were polling them was they wanted a place for a flat space, basically to just play some sports, in quote, right? And so they wanted an area. This is an area where we think we could actually create, it looks like a field in the plan, but we're really trying to create a relatively flat space that could be really designated as a play area, right? So you could kick a soccer ball, throw a football, do whatever. And this is something that the residents really wanted. This happens to be one of the few places that's not, one, relatively flat, and two, is not doesn't have a ton of trees on top of it. So it actually works out reasonably well. So that's another component. It's highly visible right along South Taylor Street, or Thomas Street, excuse me. And so it's a good location. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to bring, again, that it's open to the wider Barcroft community, even though will be use permitted with this particular set. And then, as Lauren mentioned, there are a couple of spots you can see where we're trying to add additional ADA parking spaces to accommodate some ADA units. And then each of those clusters, right, there's a set up there at the top, and then each cluster has a little picnic table, a little gathering spot that's, again, not necessarily front and center view, visible from the public right away. We want to give the residents a sense of privacy. So we're trying to sort of tuck them into courtyards and keep them a little bit private. So that's the goal here. You can see them kind of scattered around. And then the last thing I'll mention as part of RUB2 is it is the sort of second leg, the continuation of what we're calling the biophilic pathway, right? Which is something that it was approved with the MFDP plan set. And it's a bit what amounts to a series of pathways throughout the Barcroft property that help the community, not only the residents, but the community at large who may come through the Barcroft site, basically experience the natural characteristics of Barcroft and also learn a little bit about it. So what that really boils down to is we're utilizing existing sidewalks on the property to take people from essentially, if you're going east-west from George Mason up through the site, through the RCU2 part, then across Thomas Street and then to RUB2, right? And then ultimately all the way down over toward 4 Mile Run. And what it amounts to, as you can see on the screen here, is, again, we're utilizing existing sidewalks. We have to be careful when we're planting underneath existing tree canopy, not to disturb the roots. And so what we're trying to do is provide low-level, ground plane level, enhanced planting. Because right now, if you've been out there, if you remember, it's primarily just really tall trees and then grass. And there's very little in the way of shrub planting. So our goal with this pathway is to enhance the pathway with some nice seasonal native planting that, again, helps reinforce the idea that you're in nature. We're going to provide the occasional bench for someone to stop. As you know, it's hilly. People are going to walk and they're going to want to maybe have a place to pause and take it all in. So there would be benches periodically. We're thinking of, and we haven't finalized the last details, but there would be some sort of bollard or marker lighting along the way, just again, as not necessarily for safety, because there is existing site lighting on site, but a way of sort of lighting the way. It's the yellow brick road from here to there, right? And so what we're showing in the lower right-hand corner are some ideas of what that might look like, right? Some lighted bollards or some non-lighted bollards, bench ideas. And then there would be occasionally some wayfinding, right, to help introduce, and perhaps some interpretive signage, right, used to describe the ecosystem of Barcroft, what you're walking through, what's above you, what's beside you, and then helping to sort of begin to tell a story throughout the entirety of Barcroft. And again, this is open to the public, people who wander in through the property, cut through the property, as well as the residents. And it begins, I think, to add an element of richness and detail that currently doesn't exist. And it will, in a sense, also help get you from point A to point B. If you look at it, you can follow it and go all the way from one side to the other. The other sort of main axis will be Thomas Street, right, which runs, north-south. And one side of that, the eastern side of that street, would also have, again, using the existing sidewalk, this kind of planting, in addition to some street tree infill where we can. And again, just begins to define that edge and introduce another layer of interest for people using the sidewalk. So that's sort of one of the primary components of both of these use permits that are before you this evening. And then if you want to go to the next one, we can talk quickly about RUC2. Do we have the plan map?
I was going to go, Jeff, I was just going to go through all of the RB YouTube,
okay.
and then we'll come back. Yeah,
that's great.
And then after
okay,
that,
cool. Yeah.
And I wanted to interject and say, I'm sorry I don't have a plan of the biophilic path locations readily available, but if anyone's interested, at the end of these presentations, I can pull it up, or while we're discussing that, I can follow up with that in a little bit.
all right. With that, Tom, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. And thank you all. And it's great to be back here. I'm going to sort of branch off of what Jeff was talking about and emphasize the notion of flat. We have been struggling throughout working on the campus here to provide accessible units and to remind everyone, accessibility isn't just about being able to get into the building at an accessible path. It's actually getting to the building. And so many other parts of the site here are simply you can't get there. You can't park and then find a path to get to a unit that's accessible. So we do have more accessible units here than we've seen previously. The modifications that we're suggesting are sort of twofold, one of which is preserving, maintaining, and repairing the existing buildings. And the other one is creating sort of these new accessible entrances and egress for some of the new lower level entrances. But as you can see on the building, the diagrams like on the upper one there, elevation B north for building 1. A lot of what we're doing is kind of undoing bad things. There are these large through wall mechanical units that we are demolishing and re-infilling with brick to match. So we're actually undoing some of those, kind of insensitive installations from the past. And on secondary elevations, we are looking at creating much more modest kind of brick-sized louvers for required exhaust systems. A lot of these, and the general repair of the existing entries there. You are seeing a couple things like the little hatched wiring you see right there. That is where we are proposing to extend areaways down to create egress windows for some new lower level units there that are required by code. For the most part, they are out of the way. They are down below, and modifying those openings seems to be much less significant than modifying any of the upper level windows there. And then we've been using design based on the existing kind of pipe handrails, but to provide code compliance, we're showing these infill mesh panels to to make sure we can pass the 4-inch sphere rule that's required by code. Those are sort of the primary things, and you get to some of the other modifications that are tied more to accessibility on some of the other buildings. As both Lauren and Jeff mentioned, we are looking to create or widen some existing openings, or create some new openings, and with that, they would have a new covering associated with them, a new canopy, trying to meet the requirements that Virginia Housing puts out, while also meeting the historic preservation requirements here. So we are not providing coverings over the existing entrances, which open into stairways and open into units, which, while technically required by Virginia Housing, we've gotten variances for. While we are showing those coverings over the new entrances that are directly into the accessible units. Number one, it's a Virginia Housing requirement, but also it's just good practice to provide that covering. So during inclement weather, you can get into your unit there. Fundamentally, all this is work that you have seen previously in our prior submissions and ultimately found to be permissible and to the commission here. So that's it in a nutshell.
All right. Thanks, Tom. And then let's quickly go through some of the RC U2 submissions at Alice, just to highlight where these buildings are, what the scope of work will include. So here, this use permit will include 4 buildings. You can see there, buildings 44 through 46, kind of coming off 12th Road South and headed down toward South George Mason Drive. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see these buildings are located within section 6 and 7 of Barcroft. So these were constructed later in the late 1940s and part of the latter phases of Barcroft. These existing buildings today, they include about 220 units. And then we can get into the scope of work slide. Again, very almost the same scope of work that we discussed for the previous use permit. There are no garages here in this section, so we won't be dealing with those, but we will be cleaning the brick, replacing mechanical equipment, so infilling brick and introducing new penetrations on non-primary facades. Well, here in terms of accessible units, we're able to create 3 accessible units in building 44, and this will be through a conversion of existing units in those buildings. We'll have the same Virginia housing waivers and the same form-based code modifications here. And so now I'm going to hand it to Jeff to show you some of the site-specific changes that we're doing to accommodate those accessible units and general upgrades.
Hope you're muted.
Thank you. So just to help orient you, George Mason Drive is sort of arcing along the top of this drawing. Columbia Pike is way off to the left in plan view. So this section abuts the previous one that we just looked at. And I think rather than go through all the details, similar things are being proposed here. As we mentioned, individual sort of building oriented small outdoor gathering spaces in these little courtyards. And then, as Lauren said, sort of central left, you can see where we're adding a couple of small, or not a couple small, but parking spaces, ADA compliant parking spaces to get into the buildings in that unit. That's one of the flat spots again on the site. So it worked out very well from a grading standpoint. So that's all fairly unobtrusive. And then they're on the bottom side as well. Now, one thing I will spend just a little bit talking about is this plan shows perhaps a little better than the previous one, the biophilic pathway, right? So it comes from George Mason and is effectively going uphill from George Mason, right? All the way between the first buildings. It crosses the street, then continues up through what is identified in the Columbia Bike and the form-based code as a natural preserve area, which is sort of toward the bottom of the page there, as underneath the tree canopy. So again, our goal is to be as sensitive as possible to the existing tree canopy so as not to disturb those root systems, while at the same time providing an extra layer of ground plane planting to begin to, again, sort of create a tapestry of native plants that are used throughout the project, begin to bring some unity to pedestrians moving through, and to sort of identify this particular element as a thing within Barcroft. So that's the high level, right? And then there are a couple of places where the trail ends and we're no longer on sidewalk, and we're going to via some sort of painted asphalt implementation show people how to get, again, yellow brick road, right? How to get from point A to point B with some signage, and then they continue on their way. So this is it's a really nice opportunity to do something that benefits not only these residents, but also the wider community. Because again, this with some interpretive signage and some just level of detail, it'll be a very, very pleasant walk through what is already a very nice site. And with that, I think that pretty much sums up what we're doing on these sites. That's just a blow up of what we were just talking about, a couple of and then the same elements that we're proposing to carry throughout the project. So again, similar kinds of detailing, wayfinding and lighting and benches and whatnot. So that's, I think, about sums it up.
All right. And similarly speaking here, the vast majority of our work on the building exteriors here is standard preservation, conservation, cleaning the brickwork, repairing where necessary, damaged material, replacing some light fixtures with compatible lights that are modern, and then in limited areas creating, there we go, right there, light fixtures like that. Requesting variances from Virginia Housing for the majority of the spaces, and then ultimately looking at some window replacements, aluminum clad, and then ensuring that the design and execution of the windows is consistent with what was there previously in terms of the frame dimensions, the mullion thicknesses, the demising of the lights there to match what's there existing. Once again, work that you all reviewed previously, and we're just trying to maintain a similar approach in these new phases here.
then these are where the
New units
accessible-
as well, exactly. So creating those new opportunities on secondary elevations. Once again, we've been very conscious of trying to make sure that when we are doing more efforts like this, that they are on secondary elevations and not on the primary elevations that are fronting onto the roadway here. So trying to find ways to tuck them in ways that are as discreet as possible.
All right, thanks, Tom and team. That concludes our presentation. I know we've zipped through quite a few slides, so we're happy to kind of go back and bring anything up that you all want and answer any questions that you all have. Thank you.
Immediate thoughts, questions?
The awnings over the doors, I assume that's been looked at before and the design's been approved.
Yes, yeah, Lauren, that's correct, right? That the awning design is the one that has already been looked at. It's the same thing. It's the one that the HOAV's already been okay with.
Yes, this is that standing seam metal awning. It's the same one that you've seen on the prior couple of use permits.
Okay.
Yeah, and then again, we'll only be retaining these above the newly created accessible units, which I think would be 8 units in total across these 2 use permits.
And those are all on secondary elevations.
That's correct. We don't
Correct.
have any new entrances on primary elevations.
And then are there some buildings that have existing awnings like currently I noticed some sort of couple sort of almost triangle shaped awnings on buildings.
Yeah, they're not really awnings as much as they are sort of pediments around. What we were striving to do is create a sympathetic yet visually distinct new canopy element that kind of goes with the existing buildings, but does not read as part of the original material. So you can clearly understand what was original and what's been added in.
Yeah, and where you do see these existing elements, these are in the phase 2 portion of Barcroft, is typically where you see them, like this one shown here. And I think we had 1 or 2 in the renovation use permit we did last year as well. So like as Tom is saying, we're evoking that similar style with the new awnings in front of the accessible units, but not replicating it exactly.
I had a question about, it was, I believe in the section 1 portion where there were going to be windows at the lower level for egress, and then there was some discussion about a mesh situation in front of it. I just wanted,
Panels.
yeah, I
Can we
wanted
get a closer look at that?
So what we're looking at is basically we're proposing a standard pipe rail frame, which is matching that which is there on site currently. However, since it would be a new element, we can't not have it meet current codes, which basically you have to. It's called the 4-inch sphere test, and you can't pass a 4-inch sphere through any part of that railing. So we're proposing a mesh that is as transparent as possible and minimally visually intrusive as possible. We felt that was a little less onerous than doing something like 1-inch pickets at 4 inches on center, something like that.
Yeah, and I think the reason why you guys are seeing the mesh now and not previously is Tom, is it right that there were already railings there in previous locations where we had to enlarge the windows, but here there wasn't, so now we have to meet the current code requirement.
okay.
And-
Thank you.
And although we don't regulate color, though, I assume they're gonna be painted black like all the other rails that are on the,
Correct.
because that when they're painted black, they disappear a lot better than if they were white or something.
And it's just sort of tough. It's the nature of rendering here that it's the mesh fabric itself is less visible in real life than what you're seeing right now, but it's just the artifact of trying to draw something at a small scale. You end up with even tiny lines get fatter.
Just a quick, maybe dumb question, but if you escape from the bedroom units, how do you get over the rail or through the rail or whatever?
It's a matter of climbing out, and or it's also the notion of it being there is also for fire rescue being able to access from top down. So it's not just residents getting out, but it's getting fire personnel in.
Well, that's all fine and good, but how does the resident, if they're whatever, and the building's on fire, how do they get out of that space? I mean, there should be some sort of gate or something that they can steps up or whatever, they get away from the building. I don't think
That is a good question. We can look at potentially adding like a little, ladder element or something in there. So this is not atypical to have this condition here where you have a below grade areaway, where part of the notion is if there's a problem on the inside, getting outside of the space is the first way to get out and about. But your point is well taken. You don't want to be trapped there without an ability to get out of the pen there.
okay, if you look at that, I think that needs to be addressed.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments?
Kind of on the landscape plan, what were the purple trees? Were they just trees that was just like designs or just?
It's just a graphic convention to indicate a different species, perhaps an understory tree or something.
Yeah, are those the smaller understory trees, Jeff?
Yeah. Typically that's what we do as something that's flowering. So dogwood, red bud, something like that, right? So that's just our way of differentiating those from a larger canopy tree.
Okay.
All right. Anything
else?
Yeah.
Can we see any of the accessible units, ramps up and whatever, how those look? I assume they look similar to what has already been proposed, but I'd like to see one of them.
I think
Yeah,
Alice,
so
the page you're on
reasonable.
before had one with a ramp on it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have them all in one little, one section
okay.
here, but, so this is the first one. You can see the existing condition here, and this one doesn't have ramping, to Lauren's point. I guess there's a small ramp, in front of the, sorry, the one, let me just go here, just while we're here. So small ramp here. Yeah, this one is a more intensive ramp. As the whole team has mentioned, topography is not in our favor here, but we were really grasping at straws to find these accessible unit locations.
This is really similar to what you all reviewed in our second renovation phase down near the tail of Barcroft, where we had these kind of switchbacks or these longer ramps that are needed to get you up to the entries. So I think Tom and Jeff were using the same kind of materials and treatment here as previously.
Correct.
Yep.
But, well, this seems like an awful long ramp or switch, if it's switchback, even more so.
Well, it's actually it's a one directional. It's a ramp in one direction, but then once we get up to an entry elevation, it's basically a walk down to get to the other one. So it's not switching back; it's ramping up. You would have the same amount of ramp to get to just one unit. But since what we're doing is actually once you're already up there, we're saying you can traverse down to get to the second unit. So we're using one ramp to get to two entries.
Yeah, I see that, but it seems like what you what you're doing is putting a pretty significant amount of access and calling attention to the fact that it is accessible. And I find, my opinion at least, I think that's detracting from the building. I appreciate
But they need to get them, they need to get the handicapped up there. And Andy, what I like about it is that by putting the ramp in front of the platform, it can, minimizes the site. Because you can imagine this being much bigger, actually. And,
If it were one linear ramp, it would be larger. That's why I've kind of folded it in there. If we could look to like in the perspective at the top left of your screen where you see building 7, that just shows where these entrances are relative to the rest of the buildings, and so they're kind of tucked back there near where the parking is. And that's another reason we've located them here. As Tom said, accessibility is not just about inside the unit, but it's about getting to the unit. So this allows us for folks to get from the adjacent parking over here into this kind of side elevation of the building.
And it is a side elevation. It's not one of the primary elevations fronting onto the street. So it'll be relatively, tucked away and not noticeable unless you're, into the interior of the site there.
Are any of these proposed within the little courtyards that you've got?
Typically, the primary facades are off of the courtyard, so we've done our best to locate ramping not in the courtyards. So you'll see this last one we looked at. This is also on sort of the outside of the building. Oh, here's the perspective. Sorry, the key plan up here. For building 1, building 7, we were just looking at, and building 3 is the last one where the courtyard is here inside, and we are creating a new entrance on the end of the building.
We have done a fairly extensive study on the entire campus, working in partnership with Jeff and his team to identify which spaces you can even begin to get to, and once you kind of get to it, can you get in? So the areas we have been proposing here are, after the significant amount of study to get the limited number of units that we have here, these are the ones that have the least impact on the historic resource.
Well, I'm concerned actually with 2 things. One is impact on the historic building, and believe me, I used to work for an accessibility architectural firm, Paralyzed Veterans of America. And one of the issues with accessibility is people have problems, whether they're in wheelchairs or using walkers or whatever to get in, calling attention to their disability by long ramps and sort of making I'm using their words, a spectacle of their getting in is really not a good idea. So,
well, Andy, what option is there? From what I'm hearing is that they've made a pretty good study of the site to see where the least obtrusive areas are, and some of the other ones don't have ramps. This is the only one. This is the only one that has a ramp, right?
In this section, this use permit that we're looking at, we've had previous phases with ramps that we've presented to y'all, and so we have other locations in the site that have ramps, but here in RVU2, this is the only one, and excuse me, I have to check. I believe here at our CU2, yeah, we don't have ramps at our CU2.
The other point I would point out is that we have tried to design the ramps as sympathetically as possible, to use railings that look consistent with the rest of the site, to use kind of a brick cladding on the wall there, so it looks like a retaining wall, so that we're attempting to create the ramps that are needed or necessary for access in a way that is consistent with the design vocabulary of the overall campus. And we're very sensitive to your points, absolutely, that we're trying to minimize the visual impact of these accessible units. And what you're seeing here is the worst case, where to make these units accessible, we have no way to get up beyond that. The other units that we've been suggesting here, as Alice just showed, they have a canopy over it, which is currently perfectly appropriate for next year entrance. And beyond that, you wouldn't know otherwise.
Okay.
One final question on that. Has there been any consideration to doing some landscaping around the edges of it just to soften it up some?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things we'll get into when we do the final landscape plan. One of the things you don't see at this scale of plan is there would be enhanced planting at each of the entries around, each building. So all the stoops will have some sort of enhanced landscaping. That would be the same here. And the hope would be, to your point, we can hide some of the facade of that brick clad ramp, right? By planting in front of it, some of that will just dissipate and it'll be a little bit of a screen. But yes, the answer to your question is yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I think that's good.
Sarah, I see you turn your camera on. Was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I think Tom explained it. I was just about trying to enhance the compatibility while also supporting new uses and new residents on the site. I also just was going to note that we are pursuing state historic tax credit. So as part of this process, we're also going through a review with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. So I was just going to mention that. And obviously they will have a say in this as well.
Thanks, Sarah.
What's the extent of the work on the garages? Just like replacing the doors, or is there additional scope on that?
Yeah, Alice, I'll hand that off to you. As I understand, it's really just simple touch-ups here and there on the two garages, right?
Yeah, it's just like Tom mentioned on the rest of the buildings. It's as light a touch as possible. I think a lot of the doors are in not so good shape, just through years of use. So I think replacing the doors is going to be the best for the longevity of the buildings. But we'll be making sure they're either factory finished or painted in the field to match existing, and we'll be working closely with Sarah and Sarah's team and Tom's team to make sure everything's compatible with what's existing. Or sorry, I shouldn't say compatible, but appropriate for what's existing.
Thanks.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Well, it seems like you guys got some good feedback. So thank you very much for attending the meeting. Do you have any questions for us before we end the meeting?
I don't think so. Tom or Jeff, was there anything that y'all needed from the DRC? Okay. Yeah, then I think we're good to go. Yeah. All right.
Wonderful. Well, then we'll see you at the February HALRB meeting.
Yeah, so we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks.
So we're gonna make a recommendation.